Okay, so, one of the things our listeners always ask for is these really deep dives into specific kind of weird, maybe a little bit out there topics.
Right.
Yeah. And I think you found a good one this time. We're talking about altering consciousness, but with sound.
With sound, specifically. We're jumping off from this 1983 document, the Gateway Process.
Yeah, the gateway process. Now, I know 1983, you're probably thinking, oh, this is outdated, but hear me out. The core ideas of how sound can, change the way your brain waves are working and shift your mental state, that stuff is super relevant. And even scientists today are starting to explore this.
Yeah. That's one of the really interesting things about all the research you gave me is like this historical document. And then we've got modern scientific studies that are kind of looking at those same ideas, but through a new lens. We've got the Monroe Institute.
The Monroe Institute, they're the ones behind
Yeah.
Hemi-Sync, right?
Exactly. Hemi-Sync. So they're doing ongoing research on this stuff. There are modern analyses of these concepts and even new technologies like virtual reality and neurofeedback that are kind of playing with these ideas.
So we're going to try and tie all of this together, right? Show how those pieces fit.
That's the goal.
Okay, so I think the best place to start is with the gateway process itself. So anyone listening who wants to kind of follow along, you can find this document online. It's declassified. It's fascinating.
Well, yeah, a lot of people have probably already seen it.
Right. So the basic idea is that they're using sound frequencies, and specifically something called Hemi-Sync, which utilizes binaural beats. You know those, right?
Yeah, so it's like listening to, slightly different tones in each ear.
Exactly.
Mm.
And the theory, as I understand it, is that this can help the two sides of your brain, the hemispheres, kind of start to work together more in sync. And that could potentially lead to some pretty wild, altered states of consciousness.
Okay. Right. We're talking out-of-body experiences, even feeling like you're transcending space and time, like you said, things that are beyond your everyday normal experience.
Yeah. Now, when you first read this, 1983 CIA document talking about out-of-body experiences,
Yeah.
it sounds a little,
Out there.
out there, exactly.
Yeah.
But what's really cool is to see that some of these core ideas are actually starting to get some scientific backing.
Yeah, definitely. There's this study from 2019 that you gave me. It was published in Frontiers in Human Neuroscience, and they found that theta frequency binaural beats,
Which are similar to what the gateway process talks about.
very similar, could actually help improve people's working memory and even reduce anxiety. So it's like, okay, maybe this idea that you can use sound to influence your mental state to focus better or just to feel better, maybe it's not so far-fetched after all. There's actually science starting to back it up.
And it's not just that. There's this other study from 2020 in the Journal of Neurotherapy. And this one looked at using binaural beats to help people who were dealing with chronic pain. And the results are really promising. They found that it actually helped to reduce people's perception of pain and improve their overall quality of life.
That's amazing.
It is. And, the gateway process only kind of briefly mentioned this therapeutic potential of sound, but it's clearly an area that's worth exploring further.
Oh, absolutely. And speaking of exploring further, the Monroe Institute, like we mentioned earlier, they haven't stopped researching this stuff. They published a paper in 2022 in the Journal of Consciousness Studies where they were looking specifically at out-of-body experiences that were induced using their Hemi-Sync technology.
Okay, so like actual people saying, I think I left my body.
Exactly. And the participants in the study, they reported this sense of expanded awareness, like they were experiencing consciousness beyond their physical limitations, which again goes back to what the gateway process was trying to do.
Right, and you actually sent me a link to the Monroe Institute's website, too.
Oh, yeah. They have a ton of resources on there if anyone wants to kind of go deeper on this stuff. It's fascinating.
Yeah. So it seems like a lot of modern thinkers are starting to reconsider these ideas, but, in a more modern scientific context.
Definitely. I think, there's this article that you shared with me from Medium. It was called The Gateway Process, A Modern Perspective.
Oh, yeah.
And it basically takes that original CIA report and tries to interpret it through the lens of what we know about neuroscience today.
Right, with things like brainwave entrainment.
Yeah, brainwave entrainment. So that's like the idea that your brain waves will naturally kind of sync up with certain external frequencies. And they also talk about neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to change and adapt over time. And the author's basically saying these are the mechanisms that might be at play here.
And we can connect that with, our understanding of altered states of consciousness in general. You mentioned this book, Altered States of Consciousness, Experiences Out of Time and Space.
Yeah. Mark Whitman.
Mark Whitman, right. And he looks at a bunch of different methods for achieving these altered states, including sound, which I think helps us see the gateway process as part of a larger conversation about how we can intentionally shift our
Yeah,
consciousness.
absolutely.
And we can't ignore the impact of technology here. I mean, look at this study from 2023 in the Journal of Virtual Reality. They're combining VR with binaural beats to create these really immersive meditation experiences.
Wow.
And, the participants are saying that it makes them feel way more relaxed and aware than with traditional meditation.
It makes sense, right, if you're in this fully immersive environment.
Right. It's like taking an old idea and giving it this totally new life through modern tech.
Exactly. And then there's neurofeedback. I
Yeah.
mean, now you can have a device, you can wear it, and it shows you what your brainwaves are doing in real time.
That's amazing.
And you can learn to actually influence them. So it's like we're taking that brainwave synchronization concept, which is at the heart of the gateway process, and we're giving people the tools to do it themselves. And even outside of the sound stuff, there's this report. It was from 2018 on, the government was looking at remote viewing again.
Remote viewing.
Yeah, and the methodologies are different, of course, but it's just interesting that there's still this fascination, especially it seems like within academia and for therapeutic purposes with these unusual states of consciousness.
So if we're going to kind of sum all of this up, what stands out to you?
I think the biggest takeaway is that this 1983 Gateway Process document, it's a fascinating piece of history, but the ideas in it, especially about the power of sound to like change your consciousness, they're not just some relic of the past. They're being explored and validated by modern science and technology.
Yeah, and that, I think, is what makes this so exciting. We're not just looking backwards. We're looking at how these ideas are evolving and where they might take us in the future.
And that's where it gets really interesting, right? Think about it. Sound-based tech, neurofeedback, all this stuff is becoming more and more available.
So what happens when anyone can just, like, put on a headset and change their mental state?
Exactly. Does that blur the lines between what's real, what's internal, what's external? I mean, what does that mean for us as individuals? And what does it mean for how we understand consciousness itself? There are a lot of big questions here.
Big questions. And that's what we want our listeners to think about. I mean, we've given you a starting point. We've talked about these journals, the Monroe Institute's website. Go explore. See what you find.
Yeah.
Because this is a deep dive that could go on forever.
Absolutely.
And we encourage you to keep diving.
Keep